Alabama versus LSU college football pick Saturday. Alabama improved to 7-1 after the 30-6 home win at Mississippi State. Clemson tied a season low 290 yards with 29 rushing on 27 attempts. Defensively, they limited the Bulldogs to less than 3 yards per carry, 231 passing on 61 attempts. Bryce Young completed 60% with 2 touchdowns, 7.1 yards per attempt. On the season, Young has 66% completion rate, 8.6 yards per attempt. Now, LSU, they're 6-2. They come off that 45-20 home win to Ole Miss. Tigers posted 500 yards in the game, 252 rushing on 48 carries. Defensively, they allowed just over 3 yards per carry with 288 passing yards on 35 attempts. Jane Daniels completed 75% in the win with 8.9 yards per attempt and 2 touchdowns. He did run for 121 yards and 3 touchdowns. This year, Daniels a career high 70% completion rate, 7.7 yards per attempt. He has thrown for 12 touchdowns and a pick. Alabama defense on the road is surrendering 438 yards, 289 yards passing, and 8.8 yards per attempt. Also, Alabama has been heavily penalized on their road games. Daniels' runability, the key here. Play here, LSU plus 13.5. Auburn versus Mississippi State college football pick Saturday. Auburn fell to 3-5 after their 41-27 home defeat to Arkansas. Tigers produced 468 yards with 183 rushing on 38 carries. Defensively, they allowed nearly 6 yards per rush and 234 passing on 24 attempts. Robbie Ashford completed a season-high 73%, 8.6 yards per attempt. He passed for 285 yards and a touchdown. On the year, Ashford, 52% completion rate, 7.5 yards per attempt. Mississippi State drops to 5-3 after their 30-6 road loss at Alabama. Bulldogs gain 293 yards, 62 rushing on 26 carries. They limited the Crimson Tide to just 1 yard per rush with 261 passing on 37 attempts. Will Rogers season lows here, 50% completion rate, 3.9 yards per attempt. This season, Rogers has a 68% completion rate, 23 touchdowns, 4 picks, 6.7 yards per attempt. Bulls return home after their losses to really good defensive teams on the road to Alabama and Kentucky. 4 straight losses for Auburn, then a coaching change. Past 3 games, Tigers allowing 532 yards, 6.6 yards per rush, 7.6 yards per pass attempt, and 44 points. Play here will be on Mississippi State minus 13.5. Baylor versus Oklahoma college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Baylor improved to 5-3 with their 45-17 road win at Texas Tech. Bears produced 442 yards in this one, 231 rushing on 59 carries. On defense, Baylor gave up just over 4 yards a carry with 159 passing yards on 38 attempts. Bears picked off 5 passes in this one and had a +4 turnover margin. Blake Shapen completed 63% of his passes in the win with 7 yards per pass attempt. He had 211 yards passing and a touchdown on the season. Shapen, 67% completion rate, 8.3 yards per attempt. Oklahoma, they improved to 5-3 after their 27-13 road win at Iowa State. Sooners gained a season-low 332 yards, 182 rushing on 47 carries. On defense, they held the Cyclones to under 3 yards a carry with 308 passing yards on 57 attempts. Dylan Gabriel completed 58% with a season-low 5.7 yards per attempt. Gabriel threw for 148 yards and a touchdown. This season, Gabriel, the transfer from UCF, 64% completion rate, 14 touchdowns, 1 pick, 8.8 yards per attempt. At home, though, the Sooners are averaging 543 yards, 5.5 yards per rush, 315 passing with 9.5 yards per attempt. Bears are moving the football through the air and on the road here, 252 yards passing, 8.3 yards per attempt. The play here, Oklahoma and Baylor over 57.5. BYU versus Boise State college football pick Saturday. BYU fell to 4-5 with their 27-24 home defeat to East Carolina. Cougars offense generated 388 yards with 244 rushing on 42 attempts. On defense, BYU allowed nearly 7 yards per rush with 197 passing on 22 attempts. Jaron Hall, 72% completions, 2 touchdowns, and 5.8 yards per attempt. He did run for 60 yards on 8 carries. On the year, Hall over 65% completion rate, 21 touchdowns, 3 picks, 7.8 yards per attempt. Boise State improved to 6-2 with their 49-10 home win to Colorado. That was Colorado State. Now the Broncos offense posted 518 yards with 213 rushing on 45 carries. On defense, they shut down the Rams' run game and allowed 167 passing yards on 26 attempts. Taylon Green here, season highs, 80% completions, 305 yards, 10.2 yards per attempt in the win. He threw for 2 touchdowns. On the year, Green, 67% completion rate, 4 touchdowns, 4 picks, 7.7 yards per attempt. Boise State has played a weak schedule considering how down the Mountain West is. BYU has played a difficult one. Cougars have covered 6 of 7 in this venue. Cougars are running for 5.1 yards a carry and passing for 252 a game. Play here will be on BYU +8. Clemson versus Notre Dame, a college football pick for Saturday. Clemson moved to 8-0 after their 27-21 home win to Syracuse. Tigers moved the football for 450 yards with 293 rushing on 60 attempts. On defense, they allowed 4 yards per rush in that one to the Syracuse Orange with 167 passing on 26 attempts. Now DJ Ugalale completed 62% of his passes for 6.6 yards per attempt. He threw 2 interceptions and was benched. He's expected to start coming off the bye week on the season. Ugalale, 64% completion rate, 7.7 yards per attempt. He's thrown for 17 touchdowns and 4 picks. Notre Dame, they're 5-3 after their 41-24 road win at Syracuse. Fine Irish gained 362 yards with 246 rushing on 56 attempts. On defense, they limited the Orange on the ground to under 3 yards a carry and 225 passing on 36 attempts. Drew Pine at season low, 47% completion rate, 6.1 yards per attempt. On the year, Pine, 62% completions, 7.2 yards per attempt. He has thrown for 13 touchdowns and 4 picks. Bad weather is forecasted in this game. Tigers doing a good job of stopping the run this season. Despite the struggles of Ugalale, the Tigers have been a more efficient passing game. The play here will be Clemson -3.5. Florida State versus Miami, college football pick Saturday. Florida State, they sit at 5-3 after their 41-16 home win to Georgia Tech. Seminoles gained a season high 642 yards, 246 rushing on 43 carries. On defense, they limited the Yellow Jacks to just over 2 yards per carry with 198 passing on 31 attempts. Jordan Travis completed 63% of his passes, 10.4 yards per attempt. He had a season high 396 yards passing with 3 touchdowns. This season, Travis has 62% completion rate with 8.8 yards per attempt. He has thrown for 14 touchdowns and 3 picks. Miami improved to 4-4 after their 14-12 road overtime win to Virginia. Hurricanes, a season low 272 yards with 147 rushing on 38 carries. They held the Cavaliers to over 3.5 yards per rush with 208 passing on 28 attempts. Tyler Van Dyke missed the Virginia game and a game-time decision here. On the season, Van Dyke 64% completions, 7.3 yards per attempt. Jake Garcia started last week, just 51% completion rate, 4.3 yards per attempt. Garcia on the year, 60% completions, 2 touchdowns, 3 picks, 7.8 yards per attempt. Miami quarterback and offensive situation, the big issue here. They've been held at 327 yards to Duke, 272 yards at Virginia the past 2 weeks. Play here will be Florida State -7.5. Florida versus Texas A&M, college football pick Saturday. Florida fell to 4-4 with their 42-20 defeat to Georgia. Gators gained 371 yards, 100 rushing on 34 carries. On defense, they allowed over 6 yards a carry and 316 passing yards on 38 attempts. Anthony Richardson completed 48% of his passes, 271 yards, 7.1 yards per attempt. On the season, a completion rate of 55%, 7.9 yards per attempt. Texas A&M dropped to 3-5 with a 31-28 home defeat to Ole Miss. Aggies gained just 480 yards, 142 rushing on 29 carries. On defense, they limited the Rebels' passing game but allowed 390 rushing yards on 63 carries. Connor Wegman completed 63% of his throws, 4 touchdowns, 338 yards, and 7.7 yards per attempt. On the year, Wegman 61% completions, 7.3 yards per attempt. On the road, the Gators are surrendering 576 yards, 5.4 yards per rush, and 12.5 yards per pass attempt. Wegman really finally gives Aggies a solid quarterback play this year. Play will be Texas A&M -3. Oklahoma State versus Kansas, college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Oklahoma State fell to 6-2 after their 48-0 road defeat at Kansas State. A season low 217 yards for the Cowboys, 54 rushing on 30 carries. On defense, they allowed over 5 yards a carry with 296 passing yards on 37 attempts. Gunnar Gundry relieving injured Spencer Sanders, who left the game last week with a shoulder injury. In mop-up duty, Gundy 52% completions, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, 5.3 yards per attempt. Sanders on the season, Carrillo 58% completions, 7.6 yards per attempt. Kansas, they're now 5-3. They hit the bye with a 35-23 road defeat at Baylor. Jayhawks gained only 288 yards in that game, 56 rushing on 22 carries. Defensively, they surrendered over 5 yards per rush, 164 passing on 26 attempts. Jason Bean, 59% completion rate. In defeat, 8.6 yards per attempt. On the year, Bean, 62% completions, 9.8 yards per attempt. Of course, the injury to Sanders is huge, as Gundy has no starting experience entering this road game. Play here, Oklahoma State and Kansas to go under 69.5. Tennessee versus Georgia college football pick Saturday. Tennessee improved to 8-0 after that 44-6 home win to Kentucky. Volunteers gained 422 yards in that win, 177 rushing on 40 carries. Defensively, they limited the Wildcats to 3 yards per carry with 98 passing on 27 attempts. Hendon Hooker completed 76% of his passes, 3 touchdowns, 9.8 yards per attempt. On the season career highs here, 71% completions, 10.7 yards per attempt. Virginia Tech transfer had 21 touchdowns, 1 pick. Georgia moved to 8-0 with that 42-20 neutral site win to Florida. Bulldogs pushed across 555 yards, 239 rushing on 40 attempts. Defensively, they held the Gators to 3 yards per rush with 271 passing on 37 attempts. Stetson Bennett, a season low 50% completions, 8.3 yards per attempt. He finished with 316 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Respect the Vols, 40-13 road win LSU behind 502 yards. They did get past Alabama by 3. Vols holding teams to just 2.9 yards per rush. Georgia averaging just 1.2 sacks per game, and Tennessee doing a better job of pressuring the quarterback. The play here will be Tennessee at +8. Syracuse versus Pittsburgh college football pick. This one is on Saturday. Syracuse drops to 6-2 after that 41-24 home defeat to Notre Dame. Orange gained only 286 yards, 61 rushing on 25 carries. On defense, they gave up nearly 5 yards per rush to the Fighting Irish with 116 passing yards on 19 attempts. Starting quarterback Garrett Schrader was injured in the game as the backup took over. Carson Del Rio Wilson completed 50% in the loss, 8.6 yards per attempt. He had a touchdown, a pick, and 190 passing yards. Pittsburgh 4-4 after that 42-24 road defeat at North Carolina. Panthers offense posted 367 yards. They ran for 131 on 30 carries. Defensively, they limited the Tar Heels' run game but allowed 388 passing yards on 45 attempts. Keenan Slovis, a season low 45% completions, 7.6 yards per attempt. This season, a career low 58% completions, 5 touchdowns, 5 picks, 7.5 yards per attempt. Orange lost a key corner, and their quarterback situation a major concern here. The play here will be Pittsburgh -3.5. Texas versus Kansas State college football pick. This action is on Saturday. Texas fell to 5-3 with their 41-34 road defeat to Oklahoma State as they entered the bye week. Longhorns did gain 523 yards, 204 rushing on 32 carries. Defensively, they allowed 3.5 yards per rush, but 393 passing yards on 58 attempts. Quinn Ewers, season lows here, 39% completion rate, 6.5 yards per attempt. He threw for 2 touchdowns and 3 picks on the season. Ewers is completing 58% is his completion rate, 8 yards per attempt. Now Kansas State, they're 6-2, a 48-0 home win to Oklahoma State. Wildcats posted 495 yards, 199 rushing on 37 carries. They limited the Cowboys to under 2 yards per carry on 54 rushes. Kansas State held Oklahoma State to 163 passing yards on 33 attempts. Adrian Martinez is questionable after an injury 2 weeks ago. He was a full participant in practice and is a game-time decision here. Martinez this season completing 62% of his passes, 6.5 yards per attempt. He's running for a career-high 6.1 yards a carry. Will Howard started last week, 57% completions, 8 yards per attempt. He had 4 touchdowns in the victory. In his 2 games this season, Howard, 59% completion rate, 9.1 yards per attempt. Now, Kansas State has covered 6 of 7 at home against Texas. On the road, the Longhorns defense giving up 507 yards, 362 passing. They've been very poor on the road on third down, have this Longhorns offense. Play here, Kansas State +2.5. Texas Tech versus TCU college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Texas Tech fell to 4-4 after their 45-17 home defeat to Baylor. Red Raiders held to a season low 308 yards with 149 rushing on 36 carries. On defense, they allowed the Bears to under 4 yards per carry with 211 passing yards on 30 attempts. Tyler Shaw could start and has seen mop-up duty on the year. He went 1 of 2 with an interception. Baron Morton started last week, completed just 32%, a touchdown, 3 picks, and a season low 4.5 yards per attempt. On the season, 56% completion rate, 6 touchdowns, 6 picks, 6.6 yards per attempt. TCU 8-0 after their 41-31 road win at West Virginia. Horned Frogs posted 494 yards, 153 rushing on 27 carries. Defensively, they allowed just under 4 yards a carry with 275 passing yards on 39 attempts. Max Duggan, season low, 57% completions, but 341 yards in this one, passing and 12.2 yards per attempt. He threw for 3 touchdowns and an interception. This season, Duggan, a career high here, 67.4% completion rate, 10 yards per attempt. He has thrown for 22 touchdowns and 2 interceptions thus far, has this Max Duggan. So he's been putting together some pretty good work, no doubt, here for TCU. And in this game, we will go ahead and lay the points here with TCU in this one. That's our pick, is TCU. Wake Forest versus NC State, college football pick Saturday. Wake Forest fell to 6-2 after their 48-21 road defeat to Louisville. Demon Deacons gained 402 yards in this one with 92 rushing on 46 attempts. They did allow 5.5 yards per rush with 199 passing on 27 attempts. 8 turnovers here by the Demon Deacons. Sam Harden in a season low 57% completion rate, 7.7 yards per attempt. He had a touchdown with 3 interceptions. Hartman on the year, a completion rate of 63%, 8.9 yards per attempt. NC State improved to 6-2 with their 22-21 home win to Virginia Tech. Wolfpack produced 356 yards, 60 rushing on 34 carries. Defensively, they smothered the Hokies' ground attack and allowed 243 yards passing on 22 attempts. Jack Chambers completed 46% with only 2.4 yards per attempt. A backup made starter due to an injury to Devin Leary. Chambers this year has a completion rate of 52%, just 4.2 yards per attempt. Offense for NC State, the major concern behind a quarterback that barely completes half his passes for very little yardage. Demon Deacons have covered 5 straight after that blowout loss by 20. Demon Deacons have covered 5 straight after being blown out by 20 or greater points. Play here will be Wake Forest at -3.5. West Virginia versus Iowa State, college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. West Virginia fell to 3-5 after that 41-31 home defeat to TCU. Mountaineers gained 430 yards in this one, 155 rushing on 40 carries. Defensively, they allowed over 5 yards per rush, 341 passing on 28 attempts. JT Daniels, 59% completion rate, 7.1 yards per attempt. He threw for 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. On the season, Daniels' career low here, 63% completion rate, 6.7 yards per attempt. Iowa State 3-5 after their 27-13 home defeat to Oklahoma. Cyclones gained 374 yards in this one, with only 66 rushing on 27 carries. Defensively, they did limit the Sooners' passing attack, but gave up 182 rushing yards on 47 attempts. Hunter Deckers, 65% completion rate in the loss, 5.4 yards per attempt. He did throw for 308 yards with 1 touchdown and 3 picks. This season, Deckers' his completion rate is 67%, 14 touchdowns, 10 picks, 6.7 yards per attempt. On the road in conference play, the Mountaineers averaging only 15 points and 298 yards. That's against the Big 12. Big 12 road conference games, those numbers have been poor. Defensively on the road, West Virginia giving up 298 yards passing, 8.8 yards per pass attempt. Play here will be Iowa State here at -7. Air Force versus Army, college football pick for Saturday. Air Force hit the bye at 4-3 after a 19-14 home defeat to Boise State. Falcons gained 271 yards with 175 rushing on 50 carries. Defensively, they limited the ground attack for Boise State but allowed 207 yards passing on 24 attempts. Zeke Daniels, 50% completion rate in the loss, 12 yards per attempt. He did run for 70 yards on 14 carries and a touchdown. On the season, Daniels, 47% completion rate, 10.2 yards per attempt. He's averaging 4.5 yards a carry. Army hit the bye week at 3-4 after their 48-24 home win to UL Monroe. Black Knights gained 482 yards in the victory, 441 rushing on 62 carries. Defensively, they did give up over 6 yards a carry and 164 passing yards on 28 attempts. Jamel Jones attempted only 4 passes, but had 17 rushes for 96 yards and 3 touchdowns. On the year, he has 5 rushing touchdowns, 6.8 yards per attempt. He's thrown only 15 passes in 4 games, completing 6 of them for 141 yards. Black Knights quarterback Jones outperforming Daniels on the ground. Play here will be Army at +6. Arizona versus Utah college football pick for Saturday. Arizona has a mark of 3-5 with their 45-37 home win to USC. Wildcats gained 543 yards in that win, 163 rushing on 26 carries. Defensively, Arizona allowed nearly 7 yards to carry with 210 yards on the ground. And that was 411 passing yards on 45 attempts. Jane DeLora completed 60% with 8 of his passes, 8.8 yards per attempt. He threw for 380 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 pick. DeLora's season-wide 63% completion rate, 8.3 yards per attempt. Utah 6-2 after their 21-17 road win at Washington State. Utes gained a season-low 344 yards, 169 rushing on 42 attempts. Cameron Rising missed the game and had a sleeve on his knee during warm-ups on the season. He's completing 69% of his passes, 15 touchdowns, 3 picks, 8.6 yards per attempt. Backup Bryson Barnes in the start against Washington State completed 63% with 6.5 yards per attempt. On the year, Barnes 70% completion rate, 8.3 yards per attempt. On the road, Arizona is moving the football for 508 yards, 367 passing, and 9.7 yards per pass attempt. Of course, their defense has been a struggle on the road where they're giving up 475 yards, 9.4 yards per pass attempt. And teams run on Arizona. When the Wildcats defense is on the road, they're giving up 200 yards with an average of 5.5 yards a carry. Now, the Utes defense recently gave up 42 points and 556 yards to USC there on their home turf. The play here will be Arizona and Utah over 68. California versus USC college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. California fell to 3-5 with their 42-24 home win to Oregon. Golden Bears posted 402 yards with 74 rushing on 26 carries. Defensively, they allowed 4.5 yards per rush to the Ducks with 412 passing on 35 attempts. Jack Plummer, 60% completions, 6.5 yards per attempt. He had a touchdown and 2 picks. On the year, Plummer a 61% completion rate with 6.8 yards per attempt. USC, they improved to 7-1 after their 45-37 road win at Arizona. Trojans posted a season-high 621 yards with 210 rushing on 32 carries. They did allow the Wildcats over 6.5 yards per rush with 380 passing on 43 attempts. Caleb Williams completed 69% with 9.1 yards per attempt. He's had a season-high 411 yards with 5 touchdowns. Now, on the year, Williams a 65% completion rate, 24 touchdowns, 1 pick, 8.7 yards per attempt. Past 3 games, Kellis surrendering 460 yards with 332 passing and 8.3 yards per attempt. Trojans defense in this span giving up 473 yards, 5.1 yards per rush, 325 passing with 8.1 yards per attempt. USC offense in this span averaging 515 yards. The play here will be California and USC over 60 points. Georgia Tech versus Virginia college football pick for Saturday. Georgia Tech fell to 3-5 after their 41-16 road defeat at Florida State. Yellow Jackets gained only 264 yards, 66 rushing on 30 carries. Defensively, they allowed nearly 6 yards per rush with 396 passing on 39 attempts. Quarterback Jeff Sims questionable with an injured foot and missed the Florida State game. Career lows here, 58% completions, 5.9 yards per pass attempt. Zach Pyron saw work and completed 64% with 7 yards per attempt. Virginia Tech fell to 2-6 after their 22-21 road defeat at NC State. Hokies posted only 293 yards in this one, 50 rushing on 26 attempts. Defensively, they limited the Wolfpack ground attack to under 2 yards per carry and surrendered 296 passing yards on 43 attempts. Grant Wells, 50% completions, 243 passing, and a season high here, 11 yards per attempt. Virginia Tech has shown some offensive improvement in recent weeks, putting up 29 at Pittsburgh and 21 at NC State. Yellow Jackets quarterback situation, the issue here. The play here will be Virginia Tech minus 3.5. Houston versus SMU college football pick for Saturday. Houston has a 5-3 mark after their 42-27 home win to USF. They gained 490 yards with 103 rushing on 25 carries. Defensively, they allowed 5 yards per rush to the Bulls with 275 passing on 34 attempts. Clayton Tune, season high here, 84% completions, 380 yards, 10.3 yards per attempt. Tune had 4 touchdown passes. On the year, Tune, 68% completion rate, 21 touchdowns, 4 picks, 7.7 yards per attempt. SMU, they're 4-4 after their 45-34 road win at Tulsa. Mustangs produced 468 yards, 158 of it rushing on 50 carries. On defense, they allowed about 4.5 yards per rush, 260 passing on 30 attempts. Tanner Mordecai missed the game due to a concussion, but expected to play here on the season. Mordecai, 61% completions, 8.1 yards per attempt. And the Cougars have won 3 straight and covered 3 straight on the road. Tune's sharp right now. The play here in Houston +3. Iowa versus Purdue, college football pick Saturday. Iowa, they sit here at 4-4 with their 33-13 home win at Northwestern. Hawkeyes gained 393 yards in that one, 173 rushing on 36 attempts. Defensively, they held the Wildcats to about half a yard per rush with 159 passing yards on 30 attempts. Spencer Petras, a season-high 70% completion rate, 7.3 yards per attempt. I believe his name is Petrus. Season-to-date career lows here, 55% completion rate, 5.9 yards per attempt. Purdue, they fell to 5-3 with their 35-24 road win at Wisconsin. Boilermakers gained 431 yards in that one with 111 rushing yards on 33 carries. Defensively, they did allow 6 yards per carry to the Badgers, 203 passing yards on 21 attempts. Aiden O'Connell, 67% completions in the loss, 7 yards per attempt. He threw for a touchdown and season-high 3 interceptions. This season, O'Connell, 66% completion rate, 7.2 yards per attempt. Just tough to back Iowa based on the performance of their offense, as they average only 248 yards a game. They give up 3 sacks per game and are very poor on third down. Play here will be Purdue -4.5. James Madison versus Louisville, college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. James Madison hit the bye week at 5-2. They lose at home to Marshall 26-12. Dukes had a season low 247 yards with 83 rushing on 37 attempts. Defensively, they did give up nearly 4 yards per rush with 159 passing on 31 attempts. Todd Centeio missed the Marshall game due to injury, and he's doubtful here. This year, Centeio, 64% completion rate, 9.4 yards per attempt. Billy Adkins, the backup, he started. Just 37% completions and touchdowns, 4 picks, 4.7 yards per attempt. Louisville is 5-3 after that 48-21 home win to Wake Forest. Cardinals gained 410 yards, 211 rushing on 38 carries. Defensively, they held the Demon Gagans at just 2 yards per carry, 310 passing on 44 attempts, but put good pressure on quarterbacks. Louisville had a +7 turnover margin. Malik Cunningham completed 65% of his passes, 7.1 yards per attempt. On the year, Cunningham, 61% completions, a career low, 7 yards per attempt. He's averaging 6.1 yards per rush, averaging nearly 13 carries per game. James Madison quarterback situation, the main concern. Play here will be Louisville at -7. Kentucky versus Missouri, college football pick. This one is on Saturday. Kentucky fell to 5-3 with their 44-6 road defeat at Tennessee. Wildcats, a season low 206 yards, 108 rushing on 35 carries. On defense, they allowed about 4.5 yards per rush with 245 passing on 25 attempts. Will Levis completed 59% of his passes in that one. 3 interceptions and a season low 3.6 yards per attempt. On the year, Levis, 68% completion rate and a career high 9.1 yards per attempt. Missouri improved to 4-4 after their 23-10 road win at South Carolina. Tigers posted 390 yards, running for 166 on 39 attempts. Brady Cook, 65% completions in the win, 224 yards, 8.6 yards per attempt. Season-wide for Cook, 65% completion rate, 6 touchdowns, 7 picks, 7.5 yards per attempt. Wildcats have a road win at Florida, but dropped SEC games at Ole Miss and Tennessee. Tigers have gone under in 7 straight. Missouri is moving the football for 412 yards at home, going to buck the Tigers' trend as the number is just too low here. The play here will be Kentucky and Missouri under 43.5. Check that. That's Kentucky and Missouri over 43.5. Over. Feel the total here is too low in this number to take it over 43.5. Kentucky and Missouri, that's the pick. Liberty versus Arkansas, college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday, Liberty moved to 7-1 after their 41-14 home win to BYU as they hit their bye week. Flames posted 547 yards, 300 rushing on 48 carries. Defensively, they limited the Cougars to 71 rushing yards and 187 passing on 34 attempts. Jonathan Bennett, a career-high 83% completion rate, 8.5 yards per attempt. He passed for 247 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. On the year, Bennett has a completion rate of 57%, with 7 yards per attempt. He has thrown for 8 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. Arkansas improved to 5-3 with that 41-27 road victory at Auburn. Razorbacks produced 520 yards in that one, 286 rushing on 48 carries. On defense, they allowed 4.5 yards per rush, 285 passing. KJ Jefferson, 67% completion rate in the win, 9.8 yards per attempt. This season, Jefferson, 67% completion rate with a career high 9.2 yards per attempt. He has thrown for 15 touchdowns and an interception. Arkansas at home producing 471 yards, 4.7 yards per rush, 8.6 yards per pass attempt. Concern for Liberty, giving up 24 at Old Dominion, giving up 20 at UMass. That's kind of a lot for that type of team. Play here will be Arkansas at minus 13.5. Maryland versus Wisconsin college football pick Saturday. Maryland hit their bye week at 6-2 after their 31-24 home win to Northwestern. Terrapins gained 423 yards in the win, 257 rushing on 50 carries. Maryland allowed over 4 yards per carry to the Wildcats with 148 passing on 24 attempts. Talia Tagovailoa expected to return after an injury against Indiana on the season. Tagovailoa, career highs here, over 72% completions, 8.5 yards per attempt. Wisconsin improved to 4-4 after a 35-24 home win to Purdue. Badgers moved the football for 381 yards, 178 rushing on 29 carries. Defensively, the Badgers allowed over 3 yards per rush with 320 passing on 46 attempts. Graham Mertz, 62% completion rate, 2 touchdowns, 9.7 yards per attempt. On the year, Mertz, a 63% completion passer, 8.6 yards per attempt. Terrapins running for 5 yards a carry. That's pretty good here, especially with the production they're getting from Tagovailoa. But for the Terrapins offense here, play here Maryland plus 5.5. Michigan versus Rutgers college football pick Saturday. Michigan has a mark of 8-0 after their 29-7 home win here to Michigan State. Wolverines gained 443 yards in the game. Michigan Wolverines, I should say, gained 443 yards, 276 rushing on 52 attempts. Defensively, they limited the Spartans to 1.5 yards per rush, 215 passing yards on 30 attempts. J.J. McCarthy completed 60% of his passes in the win, 6.7 yards per attempt. Now, this season, McCarthy, 74% completion rate, 8.7 yards per attempt. Rutgers fell to 4-4 with that 31-0 road defeat at Minnesota. Scarlet Knights, a season low, 134 yards with 48 rushing on 21 carries. Defensively, they allowed nearly 5 yards per rush to the Golden Gophers with 122 passing on 21 attempts. Gavin Wimsatt is questionable after an injury last week and completed just 35% of his passes with 4 yards per attempt. His completion rate this season just 40% with 4.6 yards per attempt. Noah Vidal, relieved last week, completed 43% with an interception. Wolverines have played to under in 4 of 5. Past 3 games, the Wolverines holding teams at 247 yards. Rutgers, they do very well defensively, but their quarterback situation is not very good. They're going to struggle to score here. The play here will be Michigan Rutgers under 45. Michigan State versus Illinois college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Michigan State moved to 3-5 after that 29-7 road defeat at Michigan. Spartans offense produced only 252 yards, 37 rushing on 23 carries. Defensively, they allowed about 5.5 yards per rush to the Wolverines with 167 passing yards on 26 attempts. Peyton Thorne completed 57% in the loss, 7.2 yards per attempt. This season, Thorne 64% completions, 7.2 yards per attempt. Illinois, they're now 7-1 after a 26-9 road win at Nebraska. Final Illini pushed across 367 yards, 188 rushing on 48 attempts. Defensively, they limited the Cornhuskers to just over 2 yards a carry, 188 passing on 24 attempts. Tommy DeVito, season high here, 91% completions, 2 touchdowns, 8.1 yards per attempt. On the season, DeVito career high is here, 72% completions, 12 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 7.3 yards per attempt. Final line shutting down opposing offenses. They have allowed 201 yards and 5.8 yards per game at home. On the road, the Spartans surrendering 478 yards, 292 passing, and 8.2 yards per attempt. Michigan State is allowing 32 points a game on the road. The play here, Illinois, minus the 15.5. Minnesota versus Nebraska college football pick Saturday. Minnesota improved to 5-3 with their 31-0 home win to Rutgers. Golden Gophers posted 375 yards in that victory. They ran for 253 on 53 carries. Defensively, they held the Scarlet Knights' ground attack to barely 2 yards a carry and 86 passing yards on 24 attempts. Tanner Morgan completing nearly 67% of his passes, 5.8 yards per attempt on the year. Morgan, 67% completion rate, 7 touchdowns, 5 picks, 8.9 yards per attempt. Nebraska is 3-5 after that 26-9 home defeat to Illinois. The Cornhuskers a season low 250 yards, 62 rushing on 24 carries. Defensively, they allowed over 4 yards per rush and 179 passing yards on 28 attempts. Casey Thompson completed only 47% of his passes, 11.5 yards per attempt. He had a touchdown and 2 interceptions. He left with a hand injury and considered day-to-day. Chuba Hubbard just 3 of 8 for 15 yards and a pick in relief. Nebraska quarterback situation an issue. We expect Golden Gophers to stick to their string, which is running the football and playing defense. Key is keeping Tanner Morgan under 20 passing attempts. He kind of stays out of trouble that way. Play here will be Minnesota and Nebraska under 47. Navy and Cincinnati college football pick for Saturday. Navy, they're 3-5 after that 27-20 home overtime win to Temple. Midshipmen moved the football for 224 yards, rushing for all of it. And they ran it 70 times. Defensively, they limit the Owls' rush attack to just 1 yard per carry and 268 yards passing on 48 attempts. Team lost quarterback Ty Lavatai with a knee injury for the season. Xavier Arline, I guess you'll call him, threw for an incomplete pass in the win, but rushed for 54 yards, a touchdown, and 16 carries. He is 0 for 4 passing on the season, averaging 4 yards per rush. Cincinnati dropped to 6-2 after that 25-21 road defeat at UCF. Bearcats gained 333 yards with 35 rushing on 18 carries, kind of doused their hopes for a New Year's Day Bowl. Defensively, the Bearcats allowed nearly 5 yards per rush to the Knights with 247 passing on 32 attempts. Ben Bryant completed 55% in defeat, 6.6 yards per attempt. This season, Bryant, 62% completion rate, 7.7 yards per attempt. Midshipmen were competitive against the Bearcats last season, losing by a touchdown and allowing only 271 yards. Navy stopping the run on defense here. Cincinnati, well, the past 3 games, giving up 4.5 yards to carry on the ground. Play here will be Navy at plus 20. North Carolina versus Virginia college football pick for Saturday. North Carolina improved to 7-1 after their 42-24 home win to Pittsburgh. Tar Heels gained 477 yards, 89 of it rushing on 27 carries. Defensively, they allowed only over 4 yards to carry here to the Panthers, 236 passing on 31 attempts. Drake May for North Carolina here, 77% completions, 5 touchdowns, 8.8 yards per attempt. He threw for a season high 388 yards last week. May on the season, 71% completions, 29 touchdowns, 3 picks, 9.7 yards per attempt. Virginia, they fell to 3-5. 14-12 home overtime defeat to Miami. Cavaliers gained just 327 yards in that one, 119 rushing on 33 carries. Defensively, they allowed under 4 yards per rush, 125 passing on 32 attempts. Brendan Armstrong, 60% completions, 8.3 yards per attempt. This season, Armstrong career lows here, 56% completion rate, 6.7 yards per attempt. He's thrown 6 touchdowns with 9 interceptions. Tar Heels averaging 502 yards a game, but giving up 462 yards. The play here in North Carolina and Virginia over 59. Ohio State versus Northwestern college football pick Saturday. Ohio State 8-0 after their 44-31 road win at Penn State. Buckeyes gained 452 yards in that one, 98 on the ground on 26 carries. On defense, they limited the Nittany Lions' ground attack, but allowed 371 passing yards on 47 carries. C.J. Stroud here, about 79% completion rate in the win, about 10.7 yards per attempt, 354 yards in that one. This season, Stroud, a 71% completion rate, 10.7 yards per attempt. Northwestern fell to 1-7, 33-13 road defeated Iowa. Wildcats, a season low, 177 yards, 18 rushing on 37 carries. Defensively, they allowed over 4 yards per rush with 220 passing on 30 attempts. Brendan Sullivan, season higher, nearly 77% completion rate, 5.3 yards per attempt. On the year, Sullivan, 73% completions, 5.9 yards per attempt. Wildcats have been able to move the football through the air at home with 209 yards passing the game. Northwestern has gone over in 3 straight. Buckeyes over in their past 6. Play here. Ohio State Northwestern over 62.5. Oregon versus Colorado, college football pick for Saturday. Oregon improved here to 7-1, a 42-24 road win at California. Ducks gained 586 yards in the win, 174 rushing on 40 attempts. On defense, they limited the Golden Bears to about 3 yards per rush, 328 passing on 44 attempts. Bo Nix, 77% completion rate in the win, 12 yards per attempt. He threw for 412 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 picks. On the season, Nick career highs here. 72% completions, 8.9 yards per attempt. Colorado, they fell to 1-7 with that 42-34 home defeat to Arizona State. Buffs gained a season high 359 yards, 137 rushing on 35 attempts. They held ASU to nearly 4 yards per attempt, but gave up 435 passing yards on 43 attempts. JT Shrout, 38% completions, 6.5 yards per attempt. He threw for 222 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. On the air, Shrout, 43% completions, 5.6 yards per attempt. The past 3 Pac-12 games, the Ducks are averaging 570 yards, 5.8 yards per rush, 10.5 yards per attempt. They are surrendering the 402 yards, 277 passing in that period. Buffs defense in this period allowing 442 yards, 300 passing. Buffalo showing more production point-wise. The play here will be Oregon, Colorado over 61.5. Penn State versus Indiana, college football pick Saturday. Penn State fell to 6-2 after their 44-31 home defeat to Ohio State. The Lions moved the football for 482 yards with 111 rushing on 33 carries. Defensively, they held the Buckeyes to 4 yards per rush, but allowed 354 passing yards on 34 attempts. Sean Clifford, 68% completions, 7.9 yards per attempt in the loss. Clifford threw for 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. On the year, Clifford, 63% completion rate, 7.8 yards per attempt. Indiana, they're 3-5 after their 24-17 road defeat at Rutgers as they hit the bye week. Hoosiers gained only 272 yards, 62 of it rushing on 19 carries. Defensively, they allowed nearly 4 yards per rush with 113 passing yards on 24 attempts. Connor Bazelak, 56% completion rate, interception, and only 5.1 yards per attempt. Season-wide, Bazelak, career lows, 55% completions, 5.6 yards per attempt. The Lions have struggled defensively on the road, giving up 468 yards, 5.3 yards per rush, 266 yards passing. Play here will be Indiana, the plus 14. South Carolina versus Vanderbilt, college football pick. This one is on Saturday. South Carolina fell to 5-3 with their 23-10 home defeat to Missouri. Gamecocks gained a season low 203 yards with 32 rushing on 23 attempts. On defense, they allowed 3.5 yards per rush with 224 passing yards on 26 attempts. Spencer Rattler, 67% completion rate in the loss, 5.7 yards per attempt and a pick. On the year, the Oklahoma transfer has 64% completion rate, 5 touchdowns, 9 picks, 7.3 yards per attempt. Vanderbilt sits at 3-5. They come off a loss here on the road to Missouri, 17-14 as they hit the bye. Commodores posted 299 yards, 57 on the ground on 28 carries. Defensively, they did limit the Tigers to under 3 yards per rush with 211 passing on 25 attempts. A.J. Swan, just 43% completion rate, 3.8 yards per attempt, a season low here in that loss. This season, Swan, 58% completion rate, 6.6 yards per attempt. Both offenses struggling right now. Gamecocks over their past 3 games. Now, Gamecocks averaging 282 yards and Vanderbilt 284. South Carolina rushing for 3.3 yards per rush and Vandy at 2.5 in this period. The play here will be on South Carolina and Vanderbilt under 48.5. Tulane versus Tulsa, college football pick Saturday. Tulane improved to 7-1 after their 38-28 home win to Memphis. Green Wave gained 344 yards, 186 rushing on 41 carries. On defense, they limited the Tigers' ground attack with 312 passing on 41 attempts. Michael Pratt, 69% completion rate with a season low of 5.4 yards per attempt. On the year, Pratt, 67% completions, 12 touchdowns, 3 picks, career high, 8.9 yards per attempt. Tulsa fell to 3-5 with their 45-34 home defeat to SMU. Golden Hurricane produced 398 yards, 182 of it rushing on 37 attempts. Defensively, they allowed only 3 yards per rush to the Mustangs, 310 passing on 28 attempts. Davis Brin, season lows here, 43% completions, 96 yards, 6 yards per attempt. On the season, Brin, 60% completion rate, 8.8 yards per attempt. Poor recent defensive performances by Golden Hurricane here. They allowed 45 to SMU, 53 on the road to Navy. They couldn't cover at a down Temple team. Player will be Tulane, -7. UCF versus Memphis, college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. UCF improved to 6-2 with their 25-21 home win to Cincinnati. Knights offense produced 505 yards, 258 of it rushing on 52 carries. Central Florida limited the Bearcats' ground attack to just 2 yards a carry, and they gave up 298 passing yards on 46 attempts. Jason Plumlee questionable after a hard hit knocked him out of the game. The Ole Miss transfer came in. The Ole Miss transfer, I should say, a 64% completion rate, 11 touchdowns, 6 picks, 8.7 yards per attempt. It was Mikey Keene who came in relief and completed 71%, 8.4 yards per attempt. This was the first action of the season for Keene. He saw action in 11 games last year, completed 63%, 6.4 yards per attempt. Memphis, a mark of 4-4 after their 38-28 road defeat at Tulane. 3 straight losses for the Tigers. They produced 415 yards, 103 rushing on 33 carries. Defensively, they surrendered 4.5 yards per rush, 158 passing on 29 attempts. Seth Hennigan, 63% completions in this one, 7.6 yards per attempt. He had 3 touchdowns, 2 picks on the year. Hennigan, about 65% completion rate, 15 touchdowns, 5 picks, 8.1 yards per attempt. Knights are moving the football on the road here, averaging 538 yards a game, 389 yards a game, and running for 5.1 yards per rush. But their defense on the highway allowing 5.3 yards a carry, which should open up the Tigers' passing attack. Keene, a capable replacement for Plumlee. The play here, UCF and Memphis, over 59.5. UCLA versus Arizona, college football pick Saturday. UCLA moved to 7-1 after their 38-13 home win to Stanford. Bruins gained 523 yards in this one with 324 rushing on 45 carries. Defensively, they allowed 4 yards per rush with 125 passing on 31 attempts. Dorian Thompson-Robinson completed a season-low 62% of his passes, 6.9 yards per attempt on the season. Thompson-Robinson, a career-high 72% completions, 17 touchdowns, 3 picks, and 8.5 yards per attempt. Arizona State improved to 3-5 with their 42-34 road win at Colorado. Sun Devils a season-high 557 yards with 122 rushing on 33 carries. Defensively, they allowed nearly 4 yards a carry to the Buffs with 222 passing on 34 attempts. Dren Bourget completed 74% of his throws with 10 yards per attempt. He threw for 435 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. On the season, Bourget, 73% completions, 9.6 yards per attempt. Now, Bourget has picked up this offense past 3 games, ASU averaging 436 yards, 301 passing, and 9.1 yards per attempt. Bruins in this period averaging a balanced 491 yards. Both teams in this period allowing over 400 yards. The player will be UCLA and Arizona State over 66. UNLV versus San Diego State, college football pick for Saturday. UNLV fell to 4-4 after their 44-27 road defeat at Notre Dame. Rebels put up 299 yards in this one, 446 rushing on 28 carries. Defensively, they allowed 4.5 yards per rush. The Fighting Irish here, they allowed that the rush, the 4.5 yards to the Fighting Irish, and Notre Dame did pass for 205 yards on 28 attempts on this UNLV defense. Cameron Friel, season lows here, 53% completions, 80 yards, 5.3 yards per attempt on the season. Friel, 67% completion rate, 7.4 yards per attempt. San Diego State falls to 4-4 after the 32-28 road defeat to Fresno State. Aztecs gained 449 yards in this one, 158 rushing on 38 attempts. On defense, they held the Bulldogs to -3 rushing on with 394 passing yards allowed on 45 attempts. The Aztecs blew an 11-point lead in the final minute and 9 seconds. A failed onside kick recovery was critical in defeat because Fresno State was able to score right away to take the lead after getting close with it to one possession. And no timeouts. Jalen Maiden, season highs, 79% completions, 12.1 yards per attempt. He did finish with 291 yards, 2 touchdowns, but 2 interceptions. Rebels have lost 3 straight as their offense has struggled with just an average of 230 yards per game. But it's always tough to lay more than 3 points with this Aztec team. With their defense failing late, I would expect San Diego State to revert back to more heavy running volume here. And that's the case. I'm going to take UNLV here at plus the 6.5. USF versus Temple college football pick Saturday. USF fell to 1-7 after their 42-27 road defeat at Houston. Bulls generated 429 yards with 154 rushing on 31 carries. On defense, they held the Cougars to 4 yards a carry, but allowed 387 passing yards on 39 attempts. Starting quarterback Gary Bohannon out for the season. Travis Marsh, 70% completion rate, 275 yards passing, 8.1 yards per attempt. He saw action in mop-up duty this season, so season numbers here, 58%, a completion rate, 3 touchdowns, 7.9 yards per attempt. Temple fell to 2-6 after their 27-20 road overtime defeat at Navy. Owls gained 288 yards in this one, 20 rushing on 20 carries. Defensively, they allowed just 3 yards per carry, and Navy threw only 2 passes. Owls had a -2 turnover margin. E.J. Warner, 50% completions, 5.6 yards per attempt. He had a touchdown and 2 picks. Warner, a season-high 53% completion rate, 6 yards per attempt. Temple running for only 2.6 yards a carry. Bulls the better offense and gaining 5.1 yards a carry. Marsh impressive in his debut. Play here USF -3. UTSA versus UAB college football pick. This one goes off on Saturday. UTSA improved to 6-2 with that 31-27 home win in North Texas. Roadrunners gained 495 yards in this one, 257 rushing on 54 carries. Defensively, they stuffed that mean green run game, just 1 yard per rush. They did allow 325 passing yards on 31 attempts. Frank Harris completed 69% in the win, season low 6.1 yards per attempt. He had 2 touchdowns and a pick. Season to date, Harris 69% completion, 17 touchdowns, 6 picks, 8.5 yards per attempt. UAB fell to 4-4 after their 24-17 road defeat at FAU. Blazers pushed across 472 yards, 280 of it rushing on 42 attempts. On defense, they allowed nearly 5 yards per carry, 18 passing on 25 attempts. Starting quarterback Dylan Hopkins missed last week's game with a concussion, and he's listed as doubtful. Jacob Zeno completed 56% in the loss with a touchdown, just 6 yards per attempt. This season, Zeno, he saw some mop-up duty during the year, so his numbers now are 50% completion rate, 5.3 yards per attempt, 2-game losing streak, and the Blazers are averaging 17 points a game with that Hopkins injury. Roadrunners moving the football for 486 yards on the road. Play here, UTSA at -1. Washington State versus Stanford college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Washington State fell to 4-4 with that 21-17 home defeat to Utah. Cougars gained just 264 yards in this one, 42 rushing on 19 carries. Defensively, they allowed just over 4 yards per rush with 175 passing on 27 attempts. Cameron Ward, a season-high 87% completion rate, 7.2 yards per attempt. He had a touchdown pass with 222 yards. Season-to-date, Ward, 65% completion rate, 7.1 yards per attempt. Stanford sits at 3-5 with their 38-13 road defeat at UCLA. Cardinal posted a season-low 270 yards, 145 rushing on 34 carries. On defense, they surrendered 324 yards rushing on 45 attempts. They did limit the Bruins' passing attack to 199 yards on 29 attempts. Tanner McKee, a season lows, 45% completion rate, 4 yards here per attempt. This season, McKee, 61% completion rate, 7.1 yards per attempt. Both offenses sputtering the past 3 games, with the Cardinal averaging 13.7 points a game and the Cougars 14.7. Both teams struggling in pass protection as Washington State allowed 15 sacks and Stanford 9 in this past 3 games. The play here will be Washington State and Stanford under 50.5. Western Kentucky and Charlotte college football pick Saturday. Western Kentucky moves to 5-4 with their 40-13 home defeat to North Texas. Hilltoppers gained 466 yards in that one, 146 rushing on 20 attempts. On defense, they did allow over 5 yards per rush, 340 passing on 30 attempts. Austin Reed completing 59% of his passes, 6.5 yards per attempt. On the year, Reed a 68% completion rate, 7.5 yards per pass attempt. Charlotte, they improved to 2-7 after a 56-23 road win at Rice. 49ers produced 514 yards, 239 rushing on 43 carries. On defense, they allowed the Owls 5 yards per rush, 218 in the passing game on 33 attempts. Chris Reynolds, season highs here, 84% completion rate, 5 touchdowns, 13.4 yards per attempt. On the year, Reynolds, 65% completion rate, 8.6 yards per attempt. But Charlotte's defense gave up 507 yards a game, 5.4 yards per rush, and 10.2 yards per pass attempt. They have a recent home loss to FIU by 19. Play here, Western Kentucky, minus 16.5. Colorado State and San Jose State college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Colorado State fell to 2-6 with their 49-10 road defeat at Boise State. Rams had a season low 170 yards with 3 rushing yards on 20 carries. On defense, CSU surrendered over 4 yards per rush, 305 passing on 32 attempts. Clay Millen completed 65% of his passes with 8.1 yards per attempt. This season, Millen has 72% completion rate, 7.4 yards per attempt. San Jose State is 5-2 after their 35-28 home win in Nevada. Spartans produced 365 yards in this one with 25 yards rushing on 29 carries. On defense, they held the Wolfpack to less than 2 yards a carry with 223 passing on 29 attempts. Jevin Cordero, a season-high 73% completion rate, 7.6 yards per attempt. He threw for a season-high 340 yards and had 2 touchdowns. Now, on the season, Cordero, a 59% completion rate, 9 touchdowns, 1 pick, 7.7 yards per attempt. Rams are rebuilding with really poor offensive production this season, averaging just 223 yards on the road. Spartans have been a good passing team behind the Hawaii transfer Cordero. Play here will be San Jose State at minus 24. FIU versus North Texas college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. FIU has a mark of 4-4 after their 42-34 home win in overtime to Louisiana Tech. Golden Panthers gained 378 yards in this one, 57 rushing on 26 attempts. On defense, they surrendered 4.5 yards a carry, 256 passing yards on 40 attempts. Grayson James, 64% completions in the win, 3 touchdowns, and 6.7 yards per attempt. He has passed for over 300 yards of pass to Conference USA games. On the year, James, 62% completions, 6.1 yards per attempt. North Texas, they're now 5-4 after that 40-13 road win at Western Kentucky as they hit the bye week. Mean Green gained 536 yards, 196 rushing on 36 carries. Over on defense, they did allow nearly 5 yards a carry to the Hilltoppers with 320 passing yards on 49 attempts. Austin Ani completed 68% of his passes in the win, 3 touchdowns, 11.3 yards per attempt. On the year, Ani, a 56% completion rate with 9.2 yards per attempt. Now, FIU getting great quarterback play from James the past 2 games. Past 3 games, Mean Green defense allowing an average of 488 yards, 327 passing, 7.8 yards per attempt. The play here will be FIU at plus 21. Georgia State versus Southern Miss college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Georgia State improved to 3-5 after their 31-17 home win to Old Dominion. Panthers gained 413 yards, 218 rushing on 62 attempts. Defensively, they held the Monarchs to just over 1 yard per rush with 257 passing yards on 34 attempts. They committed 6 sacks. Darren Granger, season high 70% completions in the win, 9.8 yards per attempt. Granger on the year, 55% completion rate, 7.7 yards per attempt. Southern Miss moves to 5-3, a 39-24 home win to Louisiana. Golden Eagles gained 339 yards in that one, 150 rushing on 48 carries. Defensively, they limited the Raging Cajuns' run game and allowed 370 passing yards on 47 attempts. Now, Zach Wilkie, a season low 47% completion rate, 8.1 yards per attempt. He did pass for 2 touchdowns and a pick. On the year, Wilkie, 59% completions, 9 touchdowns, 9 picks, 6.7 yards per attempt. Golden Eagles have won 3 straight and 5 of 6. Past 3 games, Southern Miss allowing 322 yards, just 1.8 yards a carry on the ground. Panthers giving up 3 sacks a game, and Southern Miss averaging nearly 4 sacks per contest. Play here, Southern Miss -2. Hawaii versus Fresno State college football pick Saturday. Hawaii fell to 2-7 with their 27-20 home defeat to Wyoming. Warriors gained 350 yards with 145 rushing on 29 carries. Defensively, they did allow over 8 yards per rush to the Cowboys with 75 passing yards on 15 attempts. Braden Shager, completed 51% of his passes in the loss with 4.6 yards per attempt. He did throw for 2 touchdowns on the season. Shader here, 56% for Shager here, 56% completion rate, 5.8 yards per attempt. Now Fresno State, they're now 4-4 after their come from behind 32-28 home win to San Diego State. Bulldogs put up 391 yards with -3 rushing on 26 carries. Defensively, they allowed about 4 yards per rush to the Aztecs with 291 passing on 25 attempts. Bulldogs did have a -3 turnover margin and erased an 11-point deficit in the final minute and 9 seconds of the game. Jake Haener came back off the injured list here, 75% completion rate, 8.8 yards per attempt. Haener threw for 394 yards with 3 touchdowns and 2 picks. On the season, Haener, a 73% completion rate with 8.3 yards per attempt. 3 straight wins for Fresno State. Now on the road, Hawaii is surrendering 68% completions, 9.3 yards per attempt. Their offense on the highways averaging only 316 yards. Play here will be Fresno State at -27. Middle Tennessee State versus Louisiana Tech. College football pick. This one is on Saturday. Middle Tennessee State improved to 4-4 with their 24-13 road win at UTEP. Blue Raiders gained 378 yards with 113 rushing on 35 carries. On defense, they held UTEP to 3 yards per carry with 191 passing on 35 attempts. Chase Cunningham, 78% completions in the win, 9.8 yards per attempt. He threw for 265 yards and 3 touchdowns. Louisiana Tech, they dropped to 2-6 after their 42-34 road overtime defeat at FIU. Back-to-back overtime losses for Louisiana Tech. The Bulldogs gained 440 yards with 184 rushing on 41 carries. On defense, they limited the Golden Panthers to just over 2 yards a carry with 321 passing yards on 48 attempts. Parker McNeil missed the FIU game with an injury. With the backup out for the season, the Bulldogs went with the third string Landry Liddy. The freshman completed 70%, 256 yards, 6.4 yards per attempt. Bulldogs pass defenses performed well. Liddy impressive in his debut. Play here, Louisiana Tech plus 2.5. New Mexico versus Utah State. College football pick Saturday. New Mexico fell to 2-6 with that 41-9 home defeat to Fresno State as they hit their bye week. Lobos gained only 138 yards, 87 rushing on 27 carries. Defensively, they allowed the Bulldogs nearly 6 yards a carry, 225 passing yardage on 29 attempts. Justin Holiday was inserted as the starter, went 8 of 15 for 37 yards. He saw action at Wyoming, going 1 of 4 for 15 yards. Starter Miles Kendrick has been ineffective, 59% completions, 3 touchdowns, 7 picks, 6 yards per attempt. Utah State, they're 3-5 after their 28-14 road defeat at Wyoming. Aggies at Mountain West low, 217 yards, 113 rushing on 36 carries. On defense, they gave up 6.5 yards a rush to the Cowboys, 199 passing on 26 attempts. Starting quarterback Levi Williams has been injured throughout the season. He's thrown a total of 15 passes. Bishop Davenport in the loss to Wyoming completed 65%, 4 yards per attempt. 2 teams with issues at quarterback. Lobos have scored 9 points in their past 2 games average. The play will be Utah State and New Mexico under 43.5. Texas State versus UL Monroe. College football pick for Saturday. Texas State fell to 3-5 with their 20-14 home defeat to UL Monroe. Bobcats gained 243 yards in this one with -6 rushing on 20 attempts. Defensively, Texas State allowed under 3 yards per attempt with 187 passing on 26 attempts. Lane Hatcher completed 59% in the game, 6 yards per attempt. He threw for 254 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 pick. On the season, Hatcher at 62% completion rate, 6.6 yards per attempt. UL Monroe, they sit at 2-6 after their 48-24 road loss at Army. 4-game losing streak here. The Warhawks gained 349 yards with 185 rushing on 29 carries. Defensively, they gave up over 7 yards a carry with only 41 passing yards on 4 attempts. Chandler Rogers completed 75% of his throws, 5.9 yards per attempt. On the year, Rogers career highs here, 71% completions, 8.2 yards per attempt. Bobcats were rushing for only 1.8 yards per attempt. Warhawks have the more efficient passing game. Play here, UL Monroe at -1.5. Troy versus Louisiana. College football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Troy, 4-4 with that 10-6 road win at South Alabama. Trojans, a season low, 266 yards, 128 rushing. Defensively, they held the Jaguars to less than 2 yards per rush with 215 passing on 41 attempts. Gunnar Watson had a limited action, going 4 of 4, 54 yards on the season, a 64% completion rate, 8.9 yards per attempt. West Virginia transfer Jarek Doege saw the bulk of the action here, completed 67%, 5.6 yards per attempt. In limited action, he has a 68% completion rate with 8.8 yards per attempt. Louisiana fell to 4-4 after their 39-24 road defeat at Southern Miss. Raging Cajuns gained 439 yards in this one, 69 on the ground on 29 carries. On defense, they held the Golden Eagles' ground attack to 3 yards a carry with 189 passing on 18 attempts. Brandon Woodridge here, 47% completion rate in the loss, 7.9 yards per attempt. He had 370 passing yards with 2 interceptions, but 3 picks. On the season, Woodridge, a 59% completion rate, 7.4 yards per attempt. He's thrown for 12 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Troy has won 5 straight. They've covered all 4 of their road games, including a win at Western Kentucky and a 4-point loss at App State. Trojans allowed 14 or fewer points in 4 of their past 5. Past 3 games, quarterback play has been better on the Trojan side. Play here will be Troy minus 4.5. Marshall versus Old Dominion college football pick. This one is on Saturday. Marshall sits at 4-4 after their 24-13 home defeat to Coastal Carolina. The Thundering Herd gained 407 yards with 87 rushing on 37 carries. On defense, the Thundering Herd allowed over 3 yards per carry with 121 passing on 24 attempts. Cam Fancher, 53% completion rate in the loss, 320 yards, 8.9 yards per attempt. On the year, Fancher, 55% completion rate, 6.5 yards per attempt. Old Dominion fell to 3-5 after their 31-17 road defeat to Georgia State. Monarchs gained only 283 yards with 26 rushing on 22 carries. On defense, they allowed over 3 yards per rush to the Panthers with 195 passing on 20 attempts. Hayden Wolf, 56% completion rate, 7.6 yards per attempt. He contributed with 2 touchdown passes and a pick. On the year, Wolf, 57% completion rate, 14 touchdowns, 3 picks, 7.5 yards per attempt. Thundering Herd defense holding teams at 282 yards and 2.7 yards per rush. ODU only 26% conversion rates on third down. Play here will be Marshall at minus 2.5. South Alabama and Georgia Southern college football pick Saturday. South Alabama moved to 6-2 with their 31-3 road win at Arkansas State. Jaguars gained 363 yards in victory, 183 rushing on 47 attempts. They held the Red Wolves to just 1 yard per rush with 177 passing yards on 39 attempts. Carter Bradley completed 71% in the victory, 7.5 yards per attempt. This year, Bradley, 65% completion rate, 14 touchdowns, 5 picks, 7.9 yards per attempt. Georgia Southern checks in at 5-3 after their 28-23 road win at Old Dominion. Eagles put up 415 yards, 223 rushing on 50 carries. Defensively, they allowed over 6 yards per rush to ODU with 328 passing on 43 attempts. Kyle Van Treese, a season-high 81% completion rate, 7.1 yards per attempt. On the year, Van Treese, 62% completions, 7.2 yards per attempt. He has thrown for 18 touchdowns but 12 interceptions. Eagles have notable road win at Nebraska. They beat James Madison by 7 at home behind 590 yards. Georgia Southern, a strong offensive team, averaging 494 yards and rushing for 4.9 yards a carry. The play here, Georgia Southern at +4.